The social contract
Mhm.
is not based on honor and truth and duty and morality. It's based on an illusion of those things. Why does morality become objective with a God? Isn't this the same purpose our social contracts serve? In other words, seems to me, and it's a great question actually,
Mhm.
and it goes to the heart of what we were talking about in the episode. And I've spoken about this quite a bit and written about it, both online and books and stuff like that. Um, uh, what about God? Rooting it in God makes it objective, um, and but the social contract angle is really, really interesting, and I'm glad your friend raised it because I've actually spoken on social contract theory quite a bit. Social contract theory is just the legal way. When you look at legal theorists and why we have what's called the state of nature, which is essentially out there, nature is red in tooth and claw, to quote Alfred Lord Tennyson, where you see a might makes right kind of existence. So you have the state of nature, and then you have the state of civilization. And so, social contract theorists, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, all these folks who talk about these kind of ways in which we move out of the state of nature, where might makes right, where the strong dominate the weak. We need to move from that as human beings because we don't want the strong to dominate the weak and that be the way it is. We want
Mhm.
the weak to have a voice. We want those who might have disadvantages to not succumb to a sort of a brute strength, a brute force kind of reality of life. So we move into social contract, and social contract basically says this is a very simplified version of it, but if you don't do bad things to me, I won't do bad things to you. And if you do good things for me, I'll do good things for you. And then of course it reciprocates. If you don't do bad things to me, no harm will befall you from my end. I'll even defend you if I have to. We'll form allies and all these kind of things in social contract. That's almost the entire basis of the international law system, the international justice system as well. But you'll notice something. It's extraordinarily self-seeking or self-protective. There's not a whole lot of self-sacrifice involved in that because social contract basically says we're in a scary world where things are bad. And if we don't ally ourselves with each other, if the weak don't ally themselves with the strong, or if the weak don't conglomerate so that they can take on the strong because collectively the weak might be strong as a collective, um, don't do that, bad things will happen. Or we won't get the goods we're supposed to have as well. But I want you to notice something, a couple of things about that. First, social contract, as I said before, is extremely give to get. It's self-seeking or it's self-protective. And nothing's inherently wrong with those things, but that's the inherent thing that's going on with that. But second, in this kind of thing, it acknowledges something about the way the world actually is. When human beings are left to their own devices, they will eat each other. We will
Mhm.
dominate the weaker.
Mhm.
Now, someone might say, but they were left to their own devices and they came up with social contract, which is a way for us to help each other and get out of and sort of, we have the ability to rise above our bad natures and that kind of thing. One thing is this: social contract doesn't make morality objective, it makes it utilitarian. So if I'm involved in a social contract where, if I don't do bad things to you, Derek, you won't do bad things to me. I might do that for completely selfish interests. Like I have a disadvantage over you in some ways. Maybe I'm
Mhm.
not as clever, or I'm not as strong, or I'm not as fast. And you'll say, okay, but you got a couple of things too. Maybe you make friends better than I do. And,
Mhm.
and therefore, because you can ally yourself with other people who might be more powerful than me, I want to enter into this contract for you as well. There's nothing objectively moral about it. It's just convenient.
Yeah.
It's just a way to avoid bad consequences. And I don't mean bad in an objectively moral sense. I mean in a um, consequentialist sense, or in a the consequences aren't favorable to you.
Mhm.
But that doesn't make those consequences objectively true. It just means that for you, you don't like them. And for me, I don't like the bad consequences. And for me, I like these ones and you like these. And so we'll try to have this contract where we'll work these things out for our mutual benefit. But there's nothing moral about it. it's like a parasitic relationship in some senses, where you have that remora that sort of sticks to the bottom of a shark and cleans the shark of whatever junk collects on
Mhm.
sharks,
Yeah.
and the shark lets it live there, and it's good for the shark and it's good for the remora. It's not morally good for the remora; it's just convenient for the remora.
Right.
So, if social contract is the best we can do, then it's not moral, it's just convenient. But on top of that, people break the social contract all the time. And there's no obligor, there's no one to whom we're obligated above ourselves other than ourselves. And so you have like an international court of human rights, where a rogue state or even a superpower might do something that impinges upon the sovereignty of another nation, and there's human rights abuses happening within that nation. And so a conglomeration of nations say, we're going to sanction this person, or we're going to bring a complaint against them in the International Court of Human Rights, and bring charges against them, and then issue statements and make all this stuff. And that sovereign nation says, "Well, I don't buy it. I'm not going to abide by your rules,
Mhm.
or I don't want to be a part of your treaty organization." Now what?
Mhm.
Now it's not social contract anymore. It's fighting, whatever it is. We're in that state right now. I
Right
mean,
now, yeah.
all over the world. And of course, the most notable one is Russia and the Ukraine. Russia decides, we want that. That's ours. We get it. And
Mhm.
the Ukraine's like, no, we're us. And most of the world, it seems, sides with Russia. But all it takes is for one ally to say, no, sorry, all the world, sorry, I said that backwards. Most of the world sides with the Ukraine. But all it takes is enough superpowers of large scale populations to say, we side with Russia. And now we have a problem, don't we? And I want you to notice something, that human beings are deciding who's right and who's wrong here. And it doesn't really become objective anymore. Just because there's a social contract that we can break all the time doesn't make it objective. It just makes it convenient.
Mhm.
So the morality behind the contract is subjective. It's not non-existent. It's just not what we would call objective. There's no transcendent quality to it at all. I think that's a really good, hopefully, not really good, I should say. Hopefully it's a helpful understanding of how social contract and us agreeing to certain
Yeah.
things just doesn't work.
And would you say, just as a quick follow-up, that, because I wanna read a quote here, but from Tom Holland,
Mhm.
but is social contract and sort of the idea that, um, like, social contracts that we see seem to be good social contracts and have these human rights and intrinsic human values attached to them.
Mhm.
Are those running off of the fumes of a Christian past, but that
Mm.
Christian past is being further and further in the past, so we might run into problems because Tom Holland went searching for, he's an atheist,
Mhm.
a historian, loved ancient civilization,
Yeah.
classical civilization, uh, the Roman society, Roman.
Mhm.
So all this, he was very, his imagination was full of this and the
Yeah.
pomp and circumstance and the power. But he assumed that he'd go back and study it, and that's where he'd find his morals. But he wrote in an article called "Why I Was Wrong About Christianity." He said, "Today, even as belief in God fades across the West, the countries that were once collectively known as Christendom continue to bear the stamp of the 2 millennia-old revolution that Christianity represents. It is the principal reason why, by and large, most of us who live in post-Christian societies still take for granted that it is nobler to suffer than to inflict suffering. It is why we generally assume that every human life is of equal value. In my morals and ethics, I have learned to accept that I am not Greek or Roman at all, but thoroughly and proudly Christian."
Mhm.
Um, and so that's I it's one of those where I think sometimes in questions like this, we people may hear us saying atheists can't be moral,
Right. We're not saying that.
and we're not saying that, but it does get into, do you think that social contracts, that's where they're going to break down
Yeah.
if they're sort of removing that, what is objective, which we would say is God, who has, like you said, the power to enforce, I
Well,
guess.
because they break down, it's at the point where might the whole point of social contracts is to get out of the state of nature where might makes right. Or in fact, it doesn't even make right. It just might makes advantage, a survival advantage. Um, And in essence, if all the mighty in the world decided these countries are going to serve us, and let's say that happened, and is that really a far-fetched thing to think?
Mhm.
It's happened in the past. Let's say all of them got together in a world where we have such connectivity. And they said, we're going to do this now. And these certain people, they're going to be subject to us, and their interests are subject to us. Um, if the majority of people thought it, then the social contract is broken, or it's at least fundamentally changed, where the contract is no longer, we're going to operate on equal footing. We're going to operate on a footing where our footing is not equal. I happen to be stronger. You're going to do this thing. And in a mob sort of mafia mentality, you, by submitting to us, will protect you from us. So there's no reason to think that social contract does anything more than just shuffle. I mean, I'm not saying it's irrelevant. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I don't think that it does the trick, morally speaking, in terms of an objective morality. I think what Tom Holland is saying, and by the way, Tom Holland, not Spider-Man, um,
Right.
but the historian and author, I think he's being very honest with where we get these ideas from in the first place, because we talk oftentimes about an increasingly secular world where we don't need God for this morality, because the more secular we get, we're not getting less and less moral. Whether that's true or not is another issue, by the way. But we're not saying that you have to be a Christian to be a moral person or to say and do moral things. We're not saying that. One, we're saying that philosophically speaking, and I think that this does have practical consequences, there's no philosophical reason. There's no there's no rational reason to be good or for good to exist.
Mhm.
That we can, it's an illusion we conform ourselves to. Michael Rouse talks about this all the time, is that morality is just an illusion foisted upon you by your genes to get you to be a social cooperator. In other words, without God, the social contract
Mhm.
is not based on honor and truth and duty and morality. It's based on an illusion of those things,
Mhm.
which gets you into a socially and then genetically advantageous situation.
Mhm.
But there's no obligation
Yeah.
beyond your convenience
Yeah.
for it. But social contract works, and works best if God is the transcendent source. In other words, if we feel ourselves obligated to a higher being whose authority is above our own, we're no longer subject to the social contract being altered. It's sort of, look, I'm a Star Wars nerd. I'm a Star Wars geek. And so I'm going to make a Star Wars reference. There's a scene in Empire Strikes Back where Darth Vader is walking with Lando Calrissian, and he made a deal with Lando about whether or not the Empire would take over his whole operation. And then Darth Vader changes the deal. And Lando says, that's not our deal. That's not our original deal. And Darth Vader looks at him with the ominous James Earl Jones voice, and that sort of our black armor
Mhm.
says, I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further. If Darth Vader is the ultimate authority, and he is this capricious sort of, there's no objective root in him, there's no transcendent root to his authority, then he becomes the superpower who changes the social
Yeah.
contract. And that's what he did. But if he is obligated to an ultimate good, then what he does, though might not be judged in this life, maybe it will be, will ultimately have consequences that will show that his obligation was real.